So such a great agenda so far, so many great insights. Something that Bob Kahn said basically changed my whole intro speech. So I had to rewrite it very quickly. It really struck me when he said that data is something you get your teeth into, whereas AI is this amorphous thing. Many people mean different things by it. And as CEO of Data.org, I heartily agree with the first one. We believe the data, its representation, how accurate it is, how complete it is, how responsibly you gathered it, has a direct impact on how responsible the AI is and how accurate the models are. On the other hand, as a social sciences of technology, I still find something interesting in AI and the very nature of its being so amorphous as a concept. Because often in human societies, it is when something is not well defined that concerns about it rise. So there's a social dimension to the very lack of definition of what we mean by AI. So hopefully on this panel of great experts, we will delve into this. Because of the short time, instead of doing kind of long intros, I've asked all my panelists to both introduce themselves, but also answer this icebreaker question. In your job, what can already be replaced by the current generation of AI, and what is safe for now? So I'll go to you first, Rebecca.
Sure. Well, if we think about ChatGPT, I don't know if anybody else has this experience in the room, but there are moments when I'm on panels and I think, I sound a lot like ChatGPT, right? You know, that same notion of have some depth, but there's some superficial nature to it, and being highly conversational. So I think I'm afraid to say it, but I do think there is a component of the work that we all do around trying to communicate complex ideas that generative AI, conversational agents, can do for us and can assist us in their work. But I will say, I was sitting over here and I was watching the screen and I realized what technology can't do for us, right? Which is we want to see people, we want to be with people, we want to communicate with people. And so much of the work that we all do is about having that human connection. So I see both in panels.
Hi, Trooper Sanders, Benefits Data Trust. We are using data, thanks to the Mastercard Center and Rockefeller and others, to make the $1 trillion plus American social safety net work more effectively, more equitably. I would say, I don't know about you, but I have this unending virtual and real stack of things I need to read about AI these days just to keep up with last week. And I would love AI that can just synthesize the greatest literature of all that and give me the executive summary. I think, and that would help my work. I think the thing that can't be replaced, to pick up what you said, is the human element, the political element, and the unquantifiable side of risk. We still need human beings to do all of that and to stay plugged into one another.
Awesome. So to me, it's actually hard to think about what AI does not do. So AI is everywhere, all around us, right? In this room, in our pockets, there are probably hundreds of models running right now. On our rest, in our pockets, in the mail servers, in our text editors. So it's all over the place. And I think with this new wave of generative solutions, we see better recommendation systems, the things that we use every day. They're going to be more contextualized, more personalized. Editors are getting much better. They're semantically rich now. They can summarize things for us. They could suggest, they could autocomplete, and they could rewrite. Search is on the verge of a whole rehaul, for both from the back-end side of it, but also the front side and how we interact with searching agents. My favorite use cases along the same lines of you were referring to is any kind of tool that helps me with the information overload. Sifting through the large volume of data in various formats at a short period of time.
Excellent, thank you all. So we had 3 questions that came with this panel in this very description. Very, very large questions. We probably won't have time to delve into each one of them, but I want to pick out one to start us off with. How do we ensure that AI are built for a better, more equitable world? So, Rebecca, if you want to go first in that one.
Absolutely. So just to say quickly, I'm at an organization called the Partnership on AI. We're a nonprofit global organization, bring together about 100 partners in 17 countries. And I think multi-stakeholderism, which we've been talking about all week around the UN General Assembly, is just critical and core to responding to this moment in time for all sorts of reasons, as I know those of you in this room would agree with. But I think there's really two pieces we need to be focused on. One is, and well, actually I was thinking about accountability and agency, as Vince said. Maybe those will be my two phrases, but slightly different. Guardrails. So we can't be choosing between innovation and responsibility and safety. They must go hand in hand. We must be thinking about, as these technologies are developed, what are the appropriate regulatory regimes that need to be put into place? What are the appropriate levels of citizen engagement and oversight? And what are the levels that we need with regard to voluntary codes of conduct and ethics? So that's one piece. But then the other is, at the same time, and of course these go hand in hand, we really need to be doing what so many of the individuals are doing and thinking through the SDGs. How are we widening the community of voices that are charting the future of this technology? How are we using that better data for better decisions really intentionally and centering that story and that work? We spend a lot of time, I think, focusing on our concerns about the technology, and we need to be spending just as much time to think about the potential for its incredible impact.
I absolutely agree with that. I think to build on that, the conversations this week about the Sustainable Development Goals, we need to ask a question about not just AI and equity, but why don't we have equity right now? What are the political and social other factors of why don't we have gender and economic and racial equity right now? Because we could have the best AI. We could have all the folks here who know what to do with, say, AI in healthcare. The underlying system is still inequitable. If we still haven't figured that out, it isn't going to go anywhere. And then to take it one step further, we need to listen to, respect, and value women. We need to listen to, respect, and value women of color. We need to listen to and respect and value Black women. One of the biggest misses that we have made about AI and equity is ignoring Dr. Joy Buolamwini, Dr. Timnit Gebru, and other scholars who wrote a paper in 2016 about the corrosive effects of AI on Black women and the categorization of Black women. Now, if we had actually valued Black women then, and said, well, it's a problem that Michelle Obama is being characterized as a gorilla. I thought, well, now, wait a minute now. That's a real fire about what this can do. We would have been able to address all of the other issues that we are dealing with, is that there's some structural weaknesses in AI. But we didn't value their scholarship. We didn't value the fact that Black women were being miscategorized. So we missed that, and we missed about a decade of work.
Couldn't agree more that equity should be baked in from the ground zero into the technologies that we're developing. And enforcing equity as a post-mortem ad hoc, it just works as a bandage over the problem. Hard to spot, hard to fix, and hard to mitigate afterwards. One of the biggest problems that we have with these advanced wave of AI technologies is how hard, how complex, and how expensive it is to actually to participate in that domain. And I think these technologies are extremely powerful. They can play a key role in tightening the gap between more advanced economies and developing economies. But at the same time, right now, they actually might work to the contrary because of the closed nature of the practice. To me, one of the key elements of pushing AI more towards an equitable play is to open up as much as possible about this whole ecosystem. And when I talk about open, I don't necessarily mean train a model behind a closed door and toss it over the fence and attach some license to it. It's a true open end-to-end open approach to the problem where data is open, where the configurations are open, where the evaluations and benchmarks are open, so we can actually lower the cost of entry for multiple different practitioners to get into the game. And then when we do that, we can actually start thinking about equity at a get-go.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with all your comments. I want to pick up something you said, Trooper. So Timnit and Joy did amazing work, as you say, in 2016, and in subsequent papers like Stochastic Parrots with other collaborators. But one thing is a problem in this space. they were black women speaking from a very minority position within the makers of AI, the builders of AI. How do we make sure there are more Tim Needs and more Joys, more black women, more women of color, more men of color, so the builders of these technologies are as represented as the communities? Because until we get that, we'll have more problems like this. And 10 years from now, somebody else on the panel will say, well, if only we listened to X, because they were a minority voice. So I don't know whether we can all help galvanize that movement.
Well, so I think there are two levels. One, from a global perspective, all of the institutions, the pipeline of the ITU, other institutions that can really bring more voices, build that pipeline. Now, I'm going to be a little bit parochial, because the talent that we need, the future Tim Needs enjoys, there's a whole community of people who are locked out of that pathway to education, locked out of that pathway to those first rung jobs, getting through those weed out classes. Now, one of the solutions, and I'm going to be very, very parochial, is making sure that folks who are on that pipeline have the social support and access to the social safety net so that they can get in school, that they're healthy enough and strong enough, they can apply and afford to go to school. When they're in school, they're not hungry, so they need food assistance. And that's what Benefits Data Trust is doing, trying to make the $1 trillion social safety network. We are working with college campuses across the country to make sure that that future pipeline could get into school and get through school healthier.
100%. Ali, Rebecca, do you want to add a few words to that?
Yeah, I'll just say, couldn't agree more with what Trooper was highlighting. And I think that it's hard to do. And just as you said, our systems and structures and market forces are not set up to do it well, whether it's beginning with education and poverty or through to the way in which many of these companies are structures and how they emerged. And the choices that were made about in whose interest the technology would be deployed. And I think it's really crucially important that we tackle the question of how do you do it well? How do you think about doing design and technological development through the lens of equity and inclusion in the very first instance? And that means that process has to be equitable and inclusive and participatory. And it also means that it needs to develop in a very open and transparent way so that there's a community and set of standards around this. And that, again, as you did, I'll highlight some of the work we're doing. So in February, we were very pleased at the Summit for Democracy with the White House to announce a global task force for inclusive AI to really tackle this question. Can we as a community come up with a set of approaches, a methodological way in which we can do a much better job? And we can't think about developing AI for better if we're not thinking about how we're developing the AI as well. So that's what I have.
Thank you.
So what I add to that story is to arrive at an inclusive solution, one of the key elements in my experience that helps a lot to defining this is who are the people who are building those technologies. And if the people who are building those technologies do not represent the population that we would like to serve, we're going to have a hard time avoiding future challenges in implicit biases that will be enforced. And one of the main issues that I would like to address about this is how can we actually get those kind of practitioners and more of them to get more and more involved in this in the technology stack. And as I said, one key element for this is to have an open approach to the problem, to have a transparent approach to the problem, and also be very involved from diverse perspectives in design decisions that we make. Here's a simple example. The compute footprint that we impose by a technological design decision that we make on a particular solution would define the target audience dramatically. If I actually build a very expensive solution, by definition, by construction, I'm actually excluding a good part of the world out of that solution. So we would like to actually have all of those voices at the get-go, at the zero ground, involved in that decision.
That's a great point. So sometimes even technologically we're determining the inequalities as we build new technologies. Let's move on to a question which I think flows directly from our discussion so far, which is how do we democratize and harness the potential of AI for social impact? So how do we build a better alternative to the issues we discussed so far? I'll start with you again, Rebecca.
Okay. Well, I was thinking about this question of data for inclusive growth. And if we think about that as a way in which, if we have greater and more equitable systems, we're thinking about democratizing AI, because I always find that a challenging notion. What does democratizing AI mean? But I think, so much of this is in the specific examples of how and where we can think about what does inclusive growth mean. So there's a big debate, right, between augmentation, automation, replacement, and otherwise. And I often say that one person's augmentation is another person's automation. There's sort of a blurriness to this, but there's some really interesting research that's emerging around, in specific use cases, how are we able to use AI systems to really create and better skill equity in the workforce. So one of the examples I was reading recently by some economists was around an AI application in Tokyo, in taxis in Tokyo. You may have heard about this, called AI Navi. And what the AI system was able to do was to better predict consumer demand based on location. So the very knowledgeable and well-skilled taxi drivers who'd been around for a long time knew this. They knew where they needed to go in order to be more productive. But the newer and less skilled ones didn't. So in actual fact, introducing this raised the productivity level of all of the taxi drivers, but really raised the productivity level of those that were less skilled than otherwise. So if we think about equity and inclusive growth through how do we better scaffold and support those who may be newer entrants into the market or may not have come up through traditional educational or skills-based structures, I think there are some really interesting ways if we look at the specific about what we can do differently.
Thank you.
Yeah, that adds that there's similar research on writers and maybe more middling writers in the workplace, the gap with the high performing. So I think building on that, it's also, I think, frankly, following the money and the incentives. And all institutions have to think about how do we think about not just procurement, but leadership before you get to the procurement officers. And that starts with the boards, that starts with the executive level. How are they setting the parameters of what we want from AI if you're in a public service agency, if you're in a company, if you're in other types of institutions, because that really sets the incentives of all of the other things that we are talking about. I think the other part is, as important as diversity and inclusion is, and we need more equitable rooms, most of us also need to understand at one point or another, we are also going to be the position of privilege and power. And we're going to have to learn to challenge ourselves and say, well, wait a minute, who else do I need to pull in? What gap do I have? When do I need to use my place at the center of the table to stop the conversation? So power is going to have to rebalance power to expand it.
So to democratize AI, I think the biggest barrier that we have right now is the closed nature of the whole business. I think training the models behind closed door on unknown data is, to me, the main roadblock here to enabling others to use this. And what we're advocating at AI2 is a radical openness to the approach. We're promoting an open end-to-end approach where the data is open, the models are open, the evaluation benchmarks are open, and I believe that plays a key role in enabling others to also play with this. We just talked about the slow progress on the SGDs, and talked about the fact that one-off solutions might not get us to the goal by the end of the program. I think a common open platform where everybody understands the solution, what empowers a wider range of practitioners in this domain to help bootstrap the progress and accelerate the progress that we're all aiming for the better world. So I would just repeat my main sentence that I would actually advocate for the radical openness in this practice.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on the point of openness. So one of the things we're doing in Datadog, we just had an exercise with a few global climate experts via the 17 Rooms process that the Rockefeller Foundation and the Brookings Institution sponsored, of trying to design a new architecture for cloud-based climate data modeling. So at the moment, climate data modeling requires some supercomputers, which of course means only a few very prestigious institutions can afford to have those in place. If we're able to put them into a cloud and open up the process, then suddenly smaller research teams across the world, low middle income countries, can have equal access to that compute power. Equally, if we can open up the data that's currently logged into meteorological services, and again, make that available as a public good, that allows teams to build their own climate analysis on the ground, merge it with agricultural data, with health data. So I think those kind of examples, I fully agree, they drive further equity through giving people access all over the world. We only have a few minutes left, so we have a third question, and it's a big one, but I would ask you to do a quick summary answer to it. So the question is, what are the implications of AI for trust in institutions, for inclusive growth, for global policy?
Well, I think we are at a time of complex systems change. I'm sure, everyone says that about their time, but I think we all feel this in terms of the world we live in, whether it's climate change, whether it's mass migration, displacement of populations. We've been talking this morning about the digital divide and the divide more broadly. And I think my concern about AI is that it, and particularly with the capacity for the current development of generative AI, to very quickly, at a very high level of quality, at a very mass scale, to produce mis or disinformation and be misused, and to just spark a moment at time in this very sort of fragile world that we live in. And I think we need to be attending to that challenge as a potential implication for trust in our institutions and potential to destabilize the context in which we live in. So whereas I believe that there are all sorts of extraordinary institutions coming to the table to think creatively and generatively about the way in which AI can be used in all sorts of ways for good, I also think this is a moment in time where we need to be attending to that potential risk. And there's the opportunity for media organizations and private sector technology platforms and civil society organizations and public policy makers to really come together around this question of potential misinformation and disinformation at this crucial moment.
Yeah, I'm very concerned about institutions. And what I like to think of is we have to blend the world of code and prose. And I would, for your flight home, if you want to see where this hits human services, there's a 1,000-page Royal Commission report out of Australia that looked at the use and misuse of AI in their social security system and the devastating consequences that it had. It goes into quite some detail of what happens when you have fundamental weaknesses in institutions, laws not followed, frontline workers not listened to, clients and people who are at the vulnerable edge who are ignored. Maybe read the executive summary, but really how we deal with institutions from governance level to the frontline resident and affected party.
I think there are multiple questions within your question. Let me hit policy first. First of all, it's actually natural to be in this limbo state that we are policy-wise. Looking back, every big tech breakthrough was actually preceded with an area, a period of uncertainty. For policy, for legislators, for public, for labor, for all of those. I believe that to have an effective policy in place, we need to understand the technologies that we're trying to regulate. And we're not there yet, technology-wise. We do not understand these technologies deep enough, well enough to be able to actually sort of regulate them. I do agree that the technology is out there and we need a policy yesterday. But we also need to understand how to evaluate these systems, how to benchmark them, how in a transparent, broad way for how to understand the behavior of these systems in a more application-driven way before we start thinking about what is an effective policy. To hit the second point on trust, I think trust comes from education. Trust comes from transparency. And it comes from shared understanding of the technology that we're doing. So educating both the public, the legislators, the policymakers is actually on us to make sure that we arrive at policies that makes technological sense.
Thank you so much. I think we're out of time. The only thing I'll say is on misinformation. In 2010, 13 years ago, I was doing my PhD, and I chose this little-known subject on how online communities are challenging experts in information wars. And my supervisors were saying, oh, this is very specialist. Like, is this going to catch on? And then 13 years, my goodness. So thank you very much, my great panelists. Thank you.